Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's episode of Content Warfare TV. And I am joined by a very special guest, Chris Langeal, the founder of Structured, a brand and web design firm located just outside of Philly. Chris, it's great to have you, man. What's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So we got a conversation today that I'm very excited about for a couple different reasons. So let me lay the groundwork of where this conversation came out of. Chris is actually the web designer who's handling the redesign of my site, of RyanHanley.com, and of the soon the launch of Hanley Media Lab, which is my own content marketing shop, which is going to be opening up officially on July 1st for business. So Chris has worked in the insurance industry. We feel each other's pain in a lot of respects. We talk similar language, marketing and insurance. And though I won't be doing insurance anymore as of July 1st, we kind of connected on a lot of levels. So we have been talking web design for months now, the two of us. We wanted to do something original, something people had never seen before, and we wanted to use a very powerful platform that, Chris is going to talk a lot about today, Thesis. So this conversation is born out of the work that Chris and I are doing, and we were just doing so much talk. I said, dude, we talk about this stuff so much. Like, we just need to have our normal conversation, but share it with people and get their questions, because there's just so much to this. So, Chris, let's start out like right at the beginning, man, and because we're building in WordPress. Why WordPress, right? Like, this may seem remedial to some people, so just excuse us, but for the people that this isn't remedial for, why WordPress? Like, why are we choosing WordPress of all the platforms to build this site on?
Yeah, man, I could talk about this forever, but I'll try to keep it short. I mean, WordPress is awesome. I mean, 20% of, or maybe even more than 20% by now, of the internet is based on WordPress, and so it's extremely easy to work with. It's very well documented. It's very flexible, very powerful SEO functionality. But the thing that I love really maybe the most is, unlike a lot of open source software, WordPress has a tremendous community of developers, designers, and help is not far behind you if you get stuck with something or you need some advice from a more tenured designer or developer or what have you. So the community around WordPress is just it's insane. I mean, there's WordCamps all over the world. There's meetups all over the world. I mean, it's just it's amazing, really. But it's such a flexible platform. There's, again, so much documentation. You can do so much with it. And really, it was not even a decision that I think with you as well. We didn't even really have to think about that part. We kind of just knew that it was going to be on WordPress. But it's just so powerful, man. And the community around it is phenomenal. It's just unreal.
What do you say now? I know that, again, this is a question that we never touched on because it's not an issue in either one of our minds. But what do you say to the small or mid-sized business owner that, because of the term open source, right, immediately thinks that somehow WordPress is like easy, can be hacked really easy, or that they somehow are exposed to viruses or something? What do you say to that business owner?
Yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, WordPress is very secure. Any kind of software, whether it's open source or not, is going to have bugs. It's going to have security bugs and stuff sometimes. And WordPress, they usually get on top of that extremely fast. So if there's a plug that needs to happen, or they need to go in and fix something, it happens right away. And so I wouldn't really be really all that worried if you're a small business owner. The term open source is actually a good thing in this type of space, because instead of locking yourself in a room and trying to do everything yourself, you're leaning on the community of developers and designers to make the product better, faster. So I wouldn't really be concerned with that whatsoever, really.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so we got that out of the way. I felt like that's like the disclaimer that we had to do for the first few minutes, because the rest of this is going to be talking about web design, and in particular web design around WordPress sites. I firmly believe in the platform. So though a lot of the stuff that we talk about today, you could apply to other sites, as far as in a general sense, we'll be using WordPress as our case example, that framework. So let's talk about skins, frameworks. That's like the next route. So I'm using WordPress, and now I'm going to start designing my site. And you can go to things like Code Canyon, or to get a theme or a framework to put on top of WordPress, or Genesis. We're using Thesis. There's Elegant Themes. Talk to me a little bit about these frameworks. Like, what is their role? How do we first, let's start here. How do we drill into which framework to choose, and then we can talk about in particular the skins that sit on top of them?
Sure. So the term framework is very much a buzzword in the WordPress space. It has been for several years now, and quite frankly, you really don't need to use a framework when you're designing themes. Really, a framework is mostly beneficial not to the end user, but to the actual developer of the theme. Once you buy a skin, or you buy a child theme, suppose on Genesis, for example, you upload that child theme, you change a couple settings, and the average user doesn't really do much more than that. And so, I think people sometimes buy frameworks like Genesis or like Thesis. There's a bunch of other ones out there, in Page Lines. There's a bunch of them out there, but I think it's kind of a buzzword that sort of is maybe even hyped up a little bit more than it should be. But in the end, it actually can help you develop websites faster, and that was sort of the reason behind me choosing or us choosing Thesis. And really, the two biggest frameworks in the space right now are Genesis and Thesis, and they're both excellent frameworks. I mean, they do things a little bit differently. Well, you could say that they do things a lot differently, actually. But we ended up going with Thesis, in my opinion, because I think to the average user, or to the non-savvy website owner, I think Thesis,
which is
back
me.
End.
When it comes to coding, yeah, that's me.
I'm trying to say that nicely. But the reality is, most WordPress users are not developers. They don't know CSS. They don't know HTML. They don't know JavaScript. They can't change the colors of their header or their footer. What they buy from the demo is what they end up with. And Thesis really makes it easier, in my opinion. Again, it's just my opinion, for the non-savvy website user to manage things, and to change colors, and to change fonts, and to handle some of the back-end stuff without knowing any code. But the cool thing about it is, if you're a developer, and you're comfortable with Thesis, you can really develop websites a lot faster than writing out a bunch of code, in a text editor. You can use the pre-written code boxes, if you will, within Thesis to kind of drag and drop divs and spans and containers, and you can do all these things within a matter of minutes, as opposed to writing out a bunch of code, monotonous, long, drawn-out code in a text editor. And you can do all of this, really without leaving the WordPress admin area, which is very cool. I mean, you don't really need an FTP client. You don't really need a text editor. A lot of that stuff is handled for you on the back end. So, some of the Genesis people that might be listening to this right now might, well, you can do that with Genesis too. But again, they're both very, very good frameworks. In the end, I thought Thesis would probably be a better fit for this particular project, although I know a lot of people on sort of on both sides of the aisle, if you will. It seems to sort of be like Republicans versus Democrats almost. It's like you have the Genesis people and the Thesis people, but I'm kind of in the middle of that. I know people on both sides that I respect very much, and so yeah, the skin basically is a theme. So Thesis calls it a skin, but really it's a theme. Basically, it's a child theme that goes on top of the base framework. So.
And basically, what these skins do is add functionality that someone could want on a so you have this base or setup of WordPress, you add the framework, and then either say a skin in Thesis or a child theme in Genesis is what gives it structure. So it adds different functionality and features to different places that, if you were able, you could hard code in, but this kind of sets it up already for you. I don't want to spend too much time on the back end, but Denver actually had made a good point, and I just want you to talk about this in general when having people choosing their theme. So Denver says, the reason I chose the Genesis framework was primarily for the schema markup, which is sorely lacking from a lot of free themes. So Chris, go into a little bit. So let me turn this into a question. How much emphasis should someone who's choosing a theme or a framework place on some of these back-end schema markups, and just give a little backup on what schema is for people too, so they're aware of this, and then talk about how some of these things, like these SEO things, how they play into choosing your theme in general.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a very big thing, and that's a very good question, because one of the things that I typically like to do when I'm designing a theme is making sure that the SEO capabilities are there. And the great thing about Genesis and also Thesis is that schema markup is built in to the theme, and there are some plugins that you can use with themes that don't include schema by default that will give you some of that functionality. And basically, schema is some markup that will help Google and other search engines sort of decipher what it is you are displaying on a post or a page. So it's sort of a little strip of text that will show up in the SERP, in the search engine result, and it's very powerful if you actually use it to its fullest capabilities. Which I've worked with a lot of clients, and I don't really see anybody actually taking advantage of it. For more information, I think it's schema.org,
Yep.
and it goes into some of the details. But Genesis and Thesis both include that natively, which is huge in my opinion. It's certainly, if you're choosing a framework or you're choosing some software to build your site on, in particular, if you monetize your site, if your website is generating income for you, definitely something like that would give you an advantage over people that are not using it. So that's it's a good question, and certainly it's something to evaluate if you're picking out a theme or a framework, for sure.
Yeah. So especially if I've seen schema put into really good use with restaurants. So in just giving people an idea of what this is, right? So if you're a blog and a blogger, and that's the sole purpose of your site, then there are certain pieces of this code which tell Google, hey, we're a blog. These are blog articles. A good friend of the show, Mark Traphagen, his old company created a plugin which allows you to add in-depth article markups, which is just a schema markup which tells Google that the article is longer, more resource-driven, and Google actually has a separate section where they put in-depth articles, and essentially this just kind of gives Google an indicator that you are open to being included in that category. But like anytime you see some additional pieces of information, a lot of times it's added through this type of schema markup. And a good framework, a framework that you're paying money for, as Denver said, is going to have that built in. So I think Elegant Themes does as well, and Theme Foundry, and some of these other ones that are nice premium themes.
Yeah.
They're not going to break the bank, right? I mean, that's the big thing about themes, and why I feel like we should why I'm okay spending as much time on them as we have, is because people go free, right? Like, don't do that. If you're going to take this thing seriously, if you're going to self-host it and pay for self-hosting, budget in an additional $65 to $100 for a nice premium theme, right? I mean, spend the money because you're going to get it back. That's a pretty legitimate piece of advice.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at Genesis and Thesis, for example, they have Genesis has probably a much larger community of developers and third-party plugins and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, they're paid products, so they have teams built around them. They have support built around them. They have thriving forums and communities, and you can go on Google Plus and join a Genesis community, and you can get some really good information. And yeah, definitely. I mean, people that are building products for free, a lot of times you see them come out, and then later on, whether it be a couple weeks or a couple months, they just stop supporting them altogether. And if if you're trying to invest in your website, in your business, like you're saying, I would definitely budget some money in there to make sure that you're using a stable and supported framework or theme. Doesn't have to be a framework, just a standalone theme that's supported as well.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So we beat that up pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with the information we've got there. If you have more questions, guys, obviously just pop them in. We've got some good questions coming in already, and we're certainly going to get to those. So I want to talk about something that's near and dear to my own. So we're going to start to get into elements of design of a site here. And the first one that I have at the very top of my list that I wanted to ask you about is something that drives me nuts as a user and as a creator, and that's topography, right? Like, first of all, size of topography. When I go to a site and it has 11-point font, I'm leaving unless I absolutely must have that information. Like, I am gone. Like, I just am not going to squint at a site. Not when I know that non-coder, hack-up Genesis guy me can change the font from 11 to I think mine is actually set at like 18 points now because I want people to be able to read it, right? Like, I want you to be able to read my site, and when it's 11 points, which is the standard for a lot of these things, it doesn't work. So talk to me a little bit about size and things like line height, and then actually how do we pick header font versus the font that's actually in the body? Like where do we get ideas for that? I feel like sites you see that have it working well, you're like, wow, it's amazing. And the sites that don't have it working well, it's almost like a complete turnoff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of not just the design, but also conversions, because, just like anything else, I mean, when you're designing a website, there's a certain sort of psychological layer to making people take action on your website. And like you said, I mean, I do the same thing if there's a website with 12-point fonts. Unless I have to be there, I'm probably leaving it. It shouldn't be that way, but that's just how we have sort of we're almost trained to think that way now. So typography is huge. I mean, I spend probably more time trying to pick the right fonts for my design work, whether it be a website or a logo or any kind of print media. I spend so much time on that because it has such a huge impact on the end user, on the visitor. And there's a lot of people doing it right. There's a lot of people doing it wrong. There's a couple websites that you could check out, like google.com/web fonts. I kind of go back and forth from there. Typekit.com. That sort of have a lot of these, like, sort of, I guess you could say, premium fonts. Typekit is a paid service if you want access to their entire font library. But I use both of those. I use some other ones that you can just buy from, like myfonts.com. There's a bunch of other font like vendors, if you will. But yeah, I mean, typography is huge. I mean, you've seen sort of the movement towards a lot more spacing on websites now, like the minimalist movement, if you want to call it that. And I think that's a good thing because these websites now, it might seem small, like a small change, but I think it reaps benefits that you can't really. You might not be able to track with Google Analytics, but if the website is more pleasing to the end user and it's easier to read, you have a higher chance of converting, whether it be getting someone's email or selling a product or just getting someone to read your article. You might not even be trying to sell something, but I typically, in my design work, I typically like sans serif fonts, which basically is like sans serif just doesn't have any of those little curvy things on the font, so it's like a Helvetica or Proxima Nova or Arial or something like that. I tend to lean towards sans serif fonts. I just think they're a little bit easier to read, especially on mobile devices. So yeah, I don't know if there's really any science that goes into it, but I'm sure if you did some like case studies and stuff like that, I'm sure it makes a difference on conversions for sure. So I pay a lot of attention to that for sure.
Yeah, I think what it really comes down to, it's the overall readability, right? That's what you're really trying to get is think about when you look at your site, think about would I want to read this thing? Another thing that drives me nuts, and some of the people have said that they're doing some of the things that we're talking about, and I'm not blasting you. I'm not meaning to put you on blast. I just, I guess when I say it drives me nuts, I am putting you on blast, but nothing personal, right? Is the light colored font. So some people in the body text will have like a light gray, like a almost like an F5 color. With I just went into hex colors for people. I'm sorry about that.
Nice.
You know, like, they'll go into like this super light, and now you're like squinting at the screen like this, like, God, I can't even read it. And it's even worse on mobile, because think glare, think all the things that go on. I mean, really, the big font for me was that I started, or the reason I increased my font to 18 points was because I've seen every single month since like the beginning of 2013, I have seen a significant increase in mobile viewers, mobile people reading on mobile. And I know that if someone looks at my site at their phone and it's not big enough to read, they're gone. I mean, they're gone. I mean, and I know that responsive design and stuff can maneuver that, but I wanted to even ramp it up from that, because I want it to be super easy for someone to read it here. So I think that have someone who knows nothing about it, right? Like what's a good test? Like, I tend to use my wife, because she just hates everything online except for shopping. And so I'll be like, what do you think of this thing? And she'll be like, it's hard to read, hate it. And I'll be like, okay, now I know. The average user, someone who's not like in this game, gets it. And that takes me to like a new kind of trendy thing that I'm really interested in. And this is idea of parallax, like scrolling and viewing. So, in this kind of larger context of readability and usability, like how does that fit in, and what are some other trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, like you just said, trends. Parallax is definitely just that.
Describe parallax too, because I didn't do a good job of it.
Yeah, no problem. So parallax scrolling is basically an effect that you can do with CSS or some JavaScript that basically will make an image kind of stick as the rest of the page is scrolling through, and it kind of gives you that feeling that you are sort of like gliding through the page. It's actually pretty cool when it's done right. It can also be extremely annoying as well, but it depends on the context of the site. I think it's pretty cool though, and in the end, you want to have an interactive website, and when it first came out, everybody was like, oh, what is this? Like, this is so cool. And now I see people that are, instead of using parallax, they're sort of using like a large hero area at the top with like a big bold title at the top, and not really using as much parallax. It's something that kind of like comes and goes as a trend, but yeah, I mean, that stuff is always going to happen. There's always going to be design trends. We talked a little bit earlier about the flat design movement, the minimalist design movement, basically flat design. The thing behind that really is eliminating like gradients and drop shadows, and just kind of making stuff that's really, really clean to the eye, and flat meaning that there's no other sort of overlays or gradients or shadows or anything like that. And that really has taken off. You can go to themeforest.com, or you can go to Studio Press or any of these other these theme shops, and it's basically taken over the market. I mean, there's so many flat designs out now, and even in the design world, as far as graphic design, people are doing like flat designs on business cards, and it's like creeped over into other mediums, not just in web design. So, one thing as a designer, you want to make sure that you treat a trend with a grain of salt almost. You don't want to go all in on it, because next week it could be gone, and you're redesigning all your clients' websites. So you have to sort of pick and choose what functionality and trends to sort of follow. But I definitely think that that parallax has a big place, as does flat design. I mean, those are both very very trendy for sure.
I like parallax. I actually have the right now I have the parallax theme from Genesis that I'm using, kind of the standard setup that I've done some hacks to. You can file me under just enough to be dangerous. What I like about, I think that parallax has a place sparingly. I don't like sites that overuse it. Like for a while, the New York Times was using it, or one of the major newspapers, and like there were things scrolling behind the article the whole way down. It was really, and I think it didn't last for very long. I remember looking at it one time and going, wow, it's almost hard to read. But I think that used in certain instances in the right way, I think it has some value, because it is a nice feature, and it can add it gives more of an experience. Carrie Ann actually shares a couple of talking about trends, background music, flashing things like the green letters, like we all remember that stuff. And if you're still invested in background music and flashing things on your site, then you're probably in trouble, and it might be time to upgrade to a slightly newer site. I want to go through some of the questions and comments we have here, because we have some awesome stuff coming in. Cool. Tim says, font changes are on my to-do list, slinking into a corner first. Tim, I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to get on you. Tim actually is giving himself a hard time, because he does a fantastic job, and I know his sites, and he's doing a really good job. But definitely think about font there. Matt asks about split testing, and Chris, you may not be aware, but last week I had Ollie Gardner from Unbounce on, and I'm almost 100% sure that you can split test, because you can split test the whole page. I'm pretty sure with Unbounce. Lead pages, you can as well. I know that because basically all you're doing is creating a completely new page. So you could decrease the font size or increase the font size in certain places. And I know lead pages for sure, and I'm almost sure about Unbounce as well. Joey had a really good question too. And this is one. If you had to assign a percentage to the importance of pieces of web design when it comes to conversions, design, usability, like what would be that breakdown? How would you break down these things? And maybe this is a question for later, and we can actually come back to this later in the conversation again. But how would you break this pie out if you're saying, okay, I'm starting a new design from scratch? What are kind of loosely the percentages of importance you would give to these things?
Sure.
So rock and roll.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you wanted to come back. Yeah.
That's my bad. Yeah. Bad hosting.
No, that's fine. Yeah. As far as conversions, I mean, one of the tools that I've used in the past is called Crazy Egg, and Crazy Egg is a heat mapping tool, which will basically put it's a short snippet of code that you put in the head of your site, and it basically will track on the page where visitors are clicking. And it's an extremely valuable tool to track where people are going on the site, where their eyes are going. And once you have some of that data, and sometimes you're not going to know this until you set up your site the wrong way. But if you can use a tool like Crazy Egg to track where people are clicking and going, you can then begin to put calls to action in some of those hotspots, so that you can sort of put some of your more valuable content in the right places. And there was a lot of things, many years ago, people talked about above the fold, and you wanted to put all of your or a majority of your calls to action and your important information above the fold, and some of that still does hold true. However, if you put too much stuff above the fold, it's almost like the toothpaste aisle. Like, people show up and there's so many choices that they just don't do anything, And so it can actually work against you. But Joey, I would say, definitely the design is a huge part of it. As far as where you put your calls to action, you almost need to have some data behind that to know where to put it. Some people say that the eye goes in an L, so it starts to the left and goes down the page and then goes across the bottom of the page to the right. Obviously, if you look at a lot of sites, not everybody has all their calls to action on the left-hand side or going across the page. So, it really depends. But I would say definitely that typography has a huge part in conversions. The colors that you use on the site have a huge impact on just, the visitor's first impression, as well as, the calls to action and where you're putting them. Because if you put them all over the place, or you put them above the fold, all of them above the fold, that can actually hurt you, and people can just leave your site. So yeah, but that's definitely a good question, man, for sure.
That's a really interesting point that you just made, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I just heard you say is that a large piece of website design is actually the words that you use on the page, right? Like to me, and this is something that we've actually talked about in redesigning my site, is actually not is matching the words with the locations of the opt-ins and the locations of the different things, you know, that we want people to be able to find very easy. So someone comes to a site for a reason, we want them to be able to find things easily. And we've talked a little bit about, hey, let's try to match up the wording with the thing so that it doesn't seem out of place, right? Like people just pop a subscribe button with a, hey, subscribe to my newsletter. Like that's not an optimized website design because it may not fit the natural flow of the site. So what you're saying is that the words we use actually matter in this thing. Like, so people should think about their language when designing a site.
Absolutely, man. I mean, you know, different verbiage can be more, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I'm a loss for the word. It's on the tip of my tongue. But basically, yes, you need to sort of see what verbiage works best when in your calls to action. You know, coming in the insurance industry, like you know, we're both in at the moment. You know, it's always get a quote, free quote, and that's sort of a you know, I don't know. It's been beaten down. I mean, I don't even hear that phrase anymore. And I know that, you know, we talked about some strategies in the insurance world and how we can change that sort of call to action so that it might be a little bit more appealing, or it might convert better. And so, yeah, definitely the verbiage that you use and the text and the words that you use can have a huge impact on that for sure.
What about imagery, right? So this could be another extremely important piece of the pie is, okay, so we've understand things like flat design, basically flat design, topography, something like parallax, minimalistic design, so lots of white space. These are all readability issues. So we want to make it as easy to read, as enjoyable to read as possible, at least amount of stress on our eyeballs so we stay as long as we can. Okay. We talked a little bit about how important the language is that we're using and that the language matches design. Okay, that makes sense to me. How does imagery fit into this? Can you have too many images? Like, to me, a good image is worth more than words, and I'm actually bad at this. Imagery is, and I think maybe Denver said it, or a couple other people were talking about this in the comments as well. You know, I'm not great at imagery. So how do we find good imagery? How important is imagery to making this web design work?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, you know, imagery is, and like you're saying, I mean, if you use too much, it can cause confusion. A lot of the themes that are being released now, a lot of the designs that you see, sort of the grayscale images with the big text in the middle that sort of draws you in. In particular on blog articles, you see some people that take images from like Google Images, or they just screen grab something, and that definitely does not have the same impact as a high quality image. And for people that you know, don't know, you can go to like flickr.com Creative Commons, and you could find some awesome images that are really, like, you don't even need to put any filters on them or anything like that. You can just search for what you're looking for. And there's so many other ones. I mean, I don't have the links off the top of my head. I can put them in the chat box later, but there's so many places you can go, and it's important to make sure that the image that you're using, you know, fits the content. You know, some of these sites that I look at, it's like you skim through the content. You don't have time to actually read through all the articles. So the image that you use could make or break whether or not somebody, A, reads your headline, and B, actually reads the rest of your article. So it's a huge piece of the design puzzle, no doubt, man.
One process that I know that's worked for me as well is every Google Pluser's favorite tool, Canva. If you partner that with Flickr, so you go and you find really high quality HD images that match what you're talking about in the post or wherever you're going to put it, and you find one that you can actually edit, and then you upload that into Flickr. or upload that into Canva, and then you can add your text on top of it, or nice imagery, or call to action. And by combining those tools, you can create some really high quality images. And then all you need to do is put a little attribution at the end, and you've paid nothing for a really high quality image that you can share in your work. So here's a question that I have for you. I think for a long time, the traditional way of going about adding images was like a little 250 wide image, like that's right aligned in the post. And it seems like today, with social sharing being what it is, you know, Google Plus likes to, you know, you can have that rich link image built into Google Plus. Facebook does the same kind of thing. Like, you know, are the bigger images these either full width or at least full width of the text, a text body, or is this the way the trends are going? It seems like bigger images on the site versus smaller images that we have to try to find seems to be the trend. Is that something you're seeing in your work as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, you know, part of your design is going to be, you know, using some bigger images on some of the landing pages and stuff like that to really draw people in. So it's definitely it's more pleasing on the eye. You know, if you have to look around a page to, you know, to find the image, if it's like 100 by 100, you know, there's a place for that. Definitely, I'm not saying to never do it, but yeah, I mean, you know, an image that spans the entire width of the container or the content area is more likely to grab somebody's attention than, you know, a 200 by 200 image that is wrapped in text. So, you know, definitely, I mean, that's a big part of it. And there's little things like that, you know, that have that sort of psychological impact on the visitor. As simple as they may sound, they can actually have a big impact on that.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, Pinterest, Instagram, these social networks are starting to pop up around imagery, and you know, so we're talking. I've seen some other people share similar things. I think Denver's been very active today. Thanks, Denver. I appreciate all the work you're doing. He's been time-stamping some stuff as well. He made a really good comment, and he said, you know, just take pictures of everything around you. And you know, when you're thinking about your site design, I think it's good to think about it. And we've discussed this a lot, and I've really enjoyed kind of how we frame this conversation, because it's been outside of just you should have an opt-in box here. And you know, we are about 40 minutes in the conversation. I do want to get to some tactical stuff, because I do have some tactical questions for you. But we've been talking a little bit about, you know, think about how the actual content you put in the site impacts the design as well. And a good process that I use is my own image shared through Instagram, and then Instagram actually, when it posts it to the web, actually posts it as an 800 pixel image that you can then use on your blog. So you can repurpose an Instagram photo into your site itself, share it on Pinterest, so it's a nice big imagery. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get good imagery to match what you're trying to do. So I want to get a little tactical on you.
Sure.
So for the next few minutes here, I want to talk opt-ins. I want to talk conversions. Specifically, where the heck are we supposed to put these boxes, right? Like, there's a million. It seems like you see sites with slide-ins, pop-ups, footer bars. You know, I use an exit intent pop-up. There's things at the top of a post, things at the bottom of the post, things in your sidebar. Like, how do we figure out where they're supposed to go? Should we just put them everywhere? Like, how do we use opt-ins? Where do opt-ins go? How do they fit into our design?
Yeah, great question. I think every blogging theme or blogging website should have an opt-in box at the very bottom of the article. One of the things that we're doing with your site is making a shortcode so that you can display an opt-in box wherever you want in a page or a post. So you're sort of getting a little bit more strategic that way, because, you know, suppose you're writing a 2,000 word, 3,000 word article, and you might be making some really, really strong points throughout that article. Well, now with a shortcode, you can throw an opt-in box right in the middle of the post if you want to, or right after some of your high value content to try to get people to opt in right then and there. Why wait until the very bottom of the post when, you know, they've just read another 1,000 words and maybe it's not really in the back, you know, in the forefront of their mind? So blogging theme should. I mean, if I see a blogging theme that does not have like an after post opt-in, I think that's crazy. I mean, they belong at the bottom of the post, in my opinion. Of course, a lot of people have them in the sidebar. There's been a lot of design people that think that there shouldn't be sidebars, that it sort of detracts from the message or from the content. I think if you're trying to monetize your site, you almost have to use a sidebar. Or if you have some high-value content that you always want to display, you kind of need your sidebar. But at the bottom of a post, in the middle of a post, after your high-value content, and we're doing some things a little bit differently with your site where we're putting them up higher on the page, so that people that when they first come to the site, if they're perusing through your site, they have the opportunity to opt in from different places throughout the site. So I'm not always in favor of that, because I almost feel like sometimes you're asking for the sale before you've actually pitched someone. It's like putting social sharing icons at the very top of a post. Sometimes, depending on the content, that doesn't make sense to me either. You're putting social media icons right under your headline. Well, people haven't even read the post yet, but you have the social media icons at the very top of the post. I think the idea there is to just, the more you have them, the more places you have them, the chances of somebody actually using them are higher. So I kind of get why people do it, but there's definitely a strategic sort of way to go about doing it as well.
So that's really okay. So there's some really good stuff in there. The first is the social media icons. Okay. So let me put this two ways. I have a purist design form in my head that I would love to use. It would be single column. It would have, it would be super simple, but with just very specific calls to action at the end of a post, and maybe a trailing header that comes down that allows people to move to certain resources if at some point during the post they want, right? Like that would be my purest thing, would be big, huge words. But I've actually tested these posts and found that though they actually get a lot of click-throughs for social media, they convert very poorly in terms of subscribers. So I did this for about a month. All my individual blog posts I created in single column design. So we're talking about sidebar now. And I got a ton of social shares. I did not get the average or even near the average number of subscribers. So I think there's a lot of things you got to throw around, right? Like, so I use social media buttons at the top of my post because I know that there are people who share simply, they come to a post and they just hit share and they don't read the post, right? There are people who do that. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. We had Dino Dogan and Ralph Rivera on talking about how that's an awful thing to do a couple weeks ago, and I agree. But I know there's people that do it, and if that post, their share actually gets in front of someone who comes to the post and reads it, am I doing myself a disservice by not having there, even though my purist design says don't do it, right? So how do you, like, what is something that you traditionally, I'm going to ask you to come off the cuff here. What is something you would traditionally say that's awful for design, but that you've seen actually work well for somebody in some capacity?
You're talking about social sharing icons?
Really anything when it comes to designing, say, a blog page. Like what are some of the things that maybe like a purist design site would be like awful, never have that, but that really is something people should consider having, like maybe that scrolling social bar, which I hate as well, but
yeah, it's a good question. I mean,
it seems to work.
Yeah, the scrolling social bars used to be big. There's some plugins out there that will do that. Some people don't mind them. There's some people that really don't like them. Same thing with sort of like the email pop-up stuff. I mean, there's two sides to that. They definitely help with conversions and collecting emails. Some people don't like them. Some people don't like those little chat widgets. Like if you have a website where you have live chat on the website. So yeah, I mean, definitely anything that trails down the page. I think a purist would probably say don't do that. A trailing header, like some people have a sticky header that will basically follow you down the page, where your nav menu will be at the very top and your logo and whatever else you have in your header will kind of follow you down the page. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Again, depends on the context of the website and the content, but stuff like that can sometimes help your conversions depending on who your audience is. If your audience is a bunch of 65-year-olds, they're not going to like that very much. But if you're going after Generation Y, we're kind of used to that. We're used to pop-ups and we're used to stuff that's all over the page. As annoying sometimes as it is, we sort of we're kind of blind to it. But yeah, I mean, I would say like I think it was I don't see your name in the chat bar anymore, but somebody said if you have like stuff flashing in the background and like green font and stuff like that, that's definitely a no-no.
Pop-ups are interesting. A lot of what you're saying, so we've been talking for a while now. We've talked about a lot of different topics, and I appreciate everyone who's been leaving such great questions here. It keeps coming back to me. Everything that you say keeps coming back to readability and usability, right? Like, I mean, just boiled down, I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you is that when you're thinking about your design, the old way was stuff as much crap as you can into the page because maybe someone will take an action somewhere and then that will be good for business. And that method of thinking, I feel like, has been completely disproved, right? It's like take as much out as you possibly can and still function in whatever capacity you're trying to do. Is that really what you're saying? Is that this is try to get down to the only what's necessary so that it is enjoyable as possible when people are thinking about design here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the approaches that I take to design sometimes is, you had Ollie on the show from Unbounce not that long ago talking about the effectiveness of landing pages, and one of the reasons people use landing pages is to convert better. And so sometimes when I'm building a site or designing a site, I sort of use that logic in building the site, in eliminating unnecessary decisions for the end user. And that's sort of the point of a landing page, is to get your message out there, the who, what, when, where, why kind of thing, without any other distractions, so that you're minimizing the decisions that people have to make when they come onto a page. And it's almost like, well, then why not just design all websites like landing pages? And of course, you can't do that. It's not just that simple. And Carrie Ann just says, when you're thinking about design, follow the KISS rule: keep it simple, stupid. Which is definitely true. I mean, you want to make sure that, again, it's like the toothpaste aisle. When you show up, there's 100 different kinds of toothpaste, and it's like you spend a half an hour in the aisle. At least I do sometimes. I don't know what you guys do, but it's like paralysis by analysis. So definitely strip out what you don't need. Strip out some of the fluff that you might have. Evaluate your sidebar. Double check and see if what you have in your sidebar and your footer is really necessary. Is it really helping you, or is it just adding? Is it just muddying the water even more? So definitely that's something important that you have to really think about when you're designing a site, and as a user as well.
Yeah, I want to talk. We've mentioned it in passing a couple times, and you did share a Crazy Egg as a resource for one type of testing. But I want to talk about testing in general, because one test that I personally have done and found really interesting was the using related posts at the end of a blog post, right? Like, very common practice. People think that it plays a role in SEO. I've read anything from it has a big impact to it has no impact. It seems like the answer is more like it has a very small sliver of impact, potentially mostly just on usability. But I used a tool called Outbrain, which is just a plugin, and it has a paid content service, but they have a related post plugin. So I put the cool thing about this plugin in particular is that they have stats attached to it, so you could tell how often people were clicking through these related posts to other posts and going deeper into your site, and which posts got the most clicks. And the number of people who actually click through it was like embarrassing, right? Like no one clicks these related links. They just don't, right? They look great. I think it didn't have the option to use images. I think if there was some good imagery, then that would be different because imagery would draw people's attention down further. But just like the standard text links, even though it seems like common practice, really gets almost no results, and it just adds more crap that people have to scroll through to get to, say, your subscribe button, right? So what are some other things that people can test in their design, even some particular tools that you may know or services that you may know of that can help with testing and with analyzing kind of your site's design and functionality?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things you could do. Definitely, and we mentioned it already, but Crazy Egg is probably one of the best tools I've ever seen. I mean, it tells you right away where people are going on the site. The other thing, too, is, and this might sound somewhat trivial, but you could also do sort of like a focus group, and it doesn't have to be anybody that you pay. You can just get some of your friends or your family or whatever and just say, hey, look, what do you see when you see this website? And some people always joke and they say, put like an 8-year-old kid in front of your site, and if they can navigate through the site, then it's good. You've kept it simple and it's effective, and if they can figure it out, then anyone else can. And working in the insurance industry, I work with a lot of older folks. I work at a investment firm. I do insurance here at the investment firm. A lot of our clients are older, and they're not really savvy on their computer. And instead of using like an 8-year-old, I want to put like a 70-year-old in front of it. If they can navigate your site, then you're doing something right. So I guess old people and Crazy Egg.
Oh, not to offend anyone who's 65 to 70 years old who's very good at using the internet. So Chris took a broad sweeping stroke. I'm gonna dial that one back a little bit and say, I'm just playing. No, but I get what you're saying, and it's the same reason I use.
Hopefully I didn't offend anybody.
Yeah, I would say in general, someone who, and I think that this does play, not necessarily saying just elderly, but any like I use my wife as for example because she's good at using at e-commerce sites because she buys all kinds of stuff for our house online, but she's not a big she doesn't go to a lot of blogs. She doesn't do a lot of internet research and stuff like that. So when I make changes to my site, I use her as a test case because a pop-up to her is an immediate close. So things like that, she does those things so that I use her as a test case. Let's see here. I want to give a couple quick shout-outs. It's good to see Dustin Stout here. Dustin's actually going to be a guest in a couple weeks. Dustin's also in branding. We're going to talk more about like logos and positioning your brand and stuff with Dustin, so make sure you come back for that episode. I want to give a quick shout-out to Barry. Thanks so much for being here, man. Love it when you show up at the show. Appreciate all your comments today. And Carmen, same to you. Appreciate you having on here. This is the last thing I want to touch on tactically before, because we've talked for a long time here. Call to action phrasing, right? Like, what should we be calling our buttons? Because Ali talked about this a little bit last week. I want to get your opinion on it because I feel like this is like such a small thing, but something a lot of people do wrong and something could be killing the conversion on their site. What do we call our buttons? Like, what's a good way to think about this?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like some people say that using the word subscribe, if you're trying to collect emails, is a bad thing because sometimes when people think of subscribe, it's like almost like you're, subscribing to you're locked into something. It's like one of those psychological things. Some people recommend using the word register instead of subscribe if you're trying to collect emails. I'm not sure if anyone's ever actually done any split testing on that before. But it is important depending on what you're actually trying to do. If you're selling a product or you're trying to collect an email, to really think about that because that can actually impact whether or not somebody clicks that button. And it's funny, people actually say that the color of the button also can impact conversions as well. If you look at a website like, for example, we've been referencing Genesis a lot here, but if you look at a website like Studio Press or what's the program, which is like a content marketing time into researching and split testing, calls to action. You look at their website, a lot of their buttons. I'm not sure if that is helping their conversions at all, but I sort of tend to look at some of the big players in the space and sometimes see what they're doing because, quite frankly, I don't have a ton of extra time to really split test a lot of stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, think about the word and the verbiage that you're actually using in the call to action because, you know, it can make an impact. And if Carmen just left a good comment, she said the word submit sounds too heavy, like it's like a Mortal Kombat movie. But yeah, I mean, some words really do have a different impact. So you guys might want to try register instead of using the word subscribe. You know, see what happens for a couple weeks.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think for me, I think the one thing that I want to leave here and before we get out, I think the idea is never just set your site and forget it, right? Like, it's not like you need to be tinkering with it all the time. I'm an enormous tinkerer. I've wasted more time tinkering around. I mean, I've actually like quasi taught myself, you know, kind of some coding simply because I needed to fix things and I like to constantly change them. But just have an idea of what's going on. Have your site, your button say one thing for a month. And then at the end of the, don't look at it. Just keep putting your work in, At the end of the month, take a look at where you're at, and if try changing it to something that you know, a different version, and then seeing what happens the next month. And it's not like anything's going to happen on a day-to-day basis, but just keep an open mind to kind of maneuvering things a little bit. So, I mean, that's really kind of where I want to leave this. I think readability, huge. Usability, huge. I love the ideas of it just being easy on the eyes, right? Big fonts, flat design. We talked about all that good stuff. Chris, tell us just a little bit about Structured and what, you know, kind of, you know, I chose you. I mean, I know a lot of web designers. We had a couple very long conversations, which ultimately led to moving forward with our project together. I'm putting a lot of faith in you because this is a big move for me. And to be honest with you, like we actually, just for everyone at home, you know, we had a big heart-to-heart about whether we should show some screenshots of the site or not. And we're going to keep it veiled for now, which I think is a good decision. But tell me about Structured and just a little bit about your philosophy and what you're doing there.
Sure. So the thing I think that sort of makes me a little bit different from some of the other designers is that I'm sort of like part designer and part business consultant as well. You know, going through some of these projects with various clients, you know, I sort of figured out that just designing them a new website is really not the end game. Just handing somebody over a pretty website actually might do them no good at all. They need to, you know how to use it. They need to know how to write. They need to know about SEO. They need to know about business structure. They need to know about competitor analysis. They need to know about all these things that sort of we bring to the table. In, you know, when we design a website, it's not just, you know, picking the trendiest design or fonts or colors, but it's, you know, what are you trying to do with the website? We do a little bit more, I guess, you know, fact-finding maybe than maybe the average web design agency does. I mean, I can't, you know, I don't want, that's no slight to any other designers that might be on the call, but we spend a lot of time on, you know, research and analysis to make sure that, you know, we're giving you not only the best website, but we want to also be able to advise you how to use it. You know, a lot of people, you know, you give them a website and the next 2 weeks is, well, I want to upload this image, Chris. Can you help me upload this image? And I'm like, you know, that's part of my job, yes, in the very beginning, but I think a lot of it is also, you know, helping people market themselves after they launched a new site. Because, you know, quite frankly, if I just hand you a new website and you don't know what you don't know what to do with it, you don't know how to use it to its fullest potential, that actually could reflect negatively on me. and really it's not my fault. But some people think, well, Chris made my site and it's really not getting me any visitors. I had a guy, real quick story. I had a guy who I designed a website for, and I handed him the site, gave him his login, and literally about 4 days later, he emailed me, and he said, "I'm just curious. I typed in my website on Google, and why am I not on the first page yet?" And he just didn't understand that domain authority impacts the site. I mean, the site was not even a week old, and I think he thought that he was going to be ranking already. And so, sort of educating people on what to expect after they launch, and maybe how to market the site a little bit better is a big part of what we do.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll say about Chris in particular, and I know that specifically one of your main verticals is going to be is designing sites inside the insurance industry and helping agents in particular coming up with some designs that are focused on the insurance industry, because I think there are a lot of designs that are stuck on the insurance industry but aren't actually designed for the insurance industry. So we've had some cool conversations around that. But what we're ultimately going to unveil for my site, I'm very excited about. It's been a pleasure working with you and going through this. And ultimately, what I want to tell people is, and actually. We had a question. I'm sorry, I'm missing it right now. Who asked it? But it was, how do you choose somebody to work with? And just from my side, the best advice I can give you is give somebody who's going to give you the time, right? Like, to me, what I've enjoyed about our process is that and I've had people design sites for other things that I've done, and it's, what do you want? They put it together, they hand it to you, and they're like, okay, what changes do you want? And that's a really hard process to be successful in. I think that you really want to find someone who's willing to dig deeper. I know Chris does that. I know Dustin, who's on the call right now, I know he does that. There are web designers can be very fickle. Find one who wants to dig deeper into your site, who wants to get to know you and your business on a deeper level, and I think that you'll have a much better chance of having a successful relationship with them. So with that, there's a ton of questions. I'm going to ask Chris, dude, if you can just check out some of the questions that people are asking, dip back into the event page and just answer some of those questions, respond to those people. Appreciate you coming on so much, man. It's been a pleasure. We're going to get out.